Okay, this is the pre-roll for the Sabbath daytime service, AM to the U.S., PM to the U.K., for the 8th day of the 8th month of God's sacred calendar. It's the 28th day of October 2017 on the pagan Roman calendar. Last night I forgot to push the button for Sabbath.tv, so it didn't make it on there live. I got to remember to do that this morning. In fact, we'll start with that. Greetings and good morning to those of you watching on Sabbath.tv. I'm very sorry I forgot to punch the button last night for Sabbath.tv. I got used to, we're just running on Facebook Live for the World Watch program, and when we get to Sabbath, I'm also supposed to turn on Sabbath.tv. All right, we've got you on. We're going to go live on Facebook Live channel now, so let me bring that in as well, and I'll give the date and tell you how we're picking up from where we left off last night. But for some reason I can't find my cursor. Here it is. Okay, greetings to those of you watching on Facebook Live. Good morning. Welcome to the daylight portion of Sabbath services. We did the Bible study last night, Friday night. It's still the 8th day of the 8th month, as it was last night after sunset, but it's now changed on the pagan Roman calendar from the 27th of October last night for Friday night Bible study to the 28th day of October 2017, Saturday they call it on the Roman calendar. It's still Sabbath. It was Sabbath last night, it's Sabbath this morning. Last night it was Friday night, this morning it's Saturday on the pagan Roman calendar. We're going to pick up where we left off last night with Leroy Neff going through part 1 of Ezekiel that he gave in 1981 on the last great day of a Feast of Tabernacles, after the Feast of Tabernacles, on last great day in 1981. He did it in the evening. This part 1 he did in the evening before the daylight portion of last great day. Now we're not trying to continue the last great day, although in a way that's, last holy day was last great day, and next feast day is Passover, 5 months from now, and 5 months and a week. And so we got lots of time we can review a lot of things, but I'm especially interested in this myself, and I believe it would be good for you too, in that let me put my name up here for a moment. We'll switch it back to Leroy Neff, and I'm just in a couple minutes when we start rolling him again. This, I believe, is important, should be important to you too, because in several telecasts, Mr. Armstrong has been encouraging us to read the booklet he wrote on the United States and British Commonwealth and Prophecy. Now, some of you say, oh, well, I know that. We're in the United States. Manasseh is the United States is modern-day Manasseh, and the United Kingdom is modern-day Ephraim. And France is modern-day Reuben, etc. Some of you know and understand that. In fact, as I'm just mentioning that, let me pop this chart up on the screen for a moment. Get the lower third out of the way if I can remember what button turns that off in this other program. There we go. You may say, well, I know which countries are which tribes today. We know where the lost 10 tribes are, and yeah, I'm familiar with that and into that and understand it and have done enough historical research on it to see, wow, those people migrated from the Caucasian mountains over there just south of Russia, where they were taken captive between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea by the Assyrians, who then later wound up captive with us as Assyria was beaten by the Chaldeans and became an enemy of them, and then we all managed to escape in later years, Assyrians with their captives, to Syria, to the land of Assyria now that's known on the maps as Germany. And then from there, because we'd gotten out of the hand of the captor, was no longer able to be the captor, we were able to migrate northwest on over to England and spread out to France and Norway and Sweden, and then etc. over in northwest Europe. And then those of Manasseh were able to around the 1600s began their 1620 began their the Mayflower began their voyages over to North America. All right, brethren, and let's see. Let me see if I can get back over here. Yeah. Okay, we're going to pick it up and get in there. I'm going to go ahead and put Mr. Neff's lower third up for him. If I can get this to work. Let's see. There we go. And pick up where we left off last night. I was just saying Mr. Armstrong was encouraging us to read United States and British Commonwealth and Prophecy. And there's a lot of detail in there. And a big basis of that book comes from Ezekiel. Because as Mr. Armstrong would be teaching us Ezekiel at Ambassador College, one of the things that at the introduction of Ezekiel that he had said to us was this. I have a head note that says, how can you prove that Ezekiel means the United States and the British Commonwealth? And one of the things we learned from studying Ezekiel is that we realized when it was written more than 100 years after ancient Israel's captivity. 130 years, in fact, as you'll hear Mr. Leroy Neff explain that detail. It was written 130 years after ancient Israel's captivity, which clues us, hey, this is a prophecy. It's for the future. So that captivity, in one sense, was only a type or a forerunner in advance of the prophecy for the later captivity to come in these latter days. A lot of the things written by Ezekiel didn't apply to that first captivity anyway, with the way all of your cities would be destroyed. That's for us today. That couldn't have even been done back then. That couldn't have been done before the invention of the hydrogen bomb, where you could wipe out all these, where one country or government like the beast could wipe out so many cities at one time. And of course, in our last days, we were told in Genesis 49, that's covered in United States and British Commonwealth and Prophecy, where are, like the chart I just had up on the screen, we get that from Genesis 49 by tracing what Jacob told his 12 sons would befall them in the last days as he gathered them around his bed just before he died. And he gave us enough information about where the boys would be in the last days by describing the characteristics of the land they would be in and the circumstances in such a way we can look at that and say, hey, Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they are in America and in the United Kingdom. All right, brethren, let me just say this before we start that. I hope you had a good refreshing night's sleep, that you stayed warm. I heard from some that had freezing temperatures, that we had some pretty cold temperatures here last night, too. I think it got down to 31. Well, that's freezing. And, I forgot to turn off the water in those certain outdoor pipes. I better check that this morning. Usually, though, if it's got to be 2 or 3 days of freezing before you have a problem normally with your pipes. But when the first one comes, that's a warning. You better go empty the water out of those outdoor pipes and then do your winterizing for them. Oh yeah, I got to put all those cap covers back on. Yeah, okay. That reminds me of one thing, though, brethren, before we start this, that I think is a good thing to remind us. Maybe I'll come at the end, if we have time, I'll come back and remind us again from Matthew 24, how Jesus Christ, with this cold weather, this would be a good one to keep in the forethoughts of our mind. He instructed us regarding, if you want to be accounted worthy to escape, which we all should. Mr. Armstrong told me privately when I asked him, I said, hey, Mr. Armstrong, the book on the 7 laws of success talks about, your goals and praying for God to guide your goals, but most of that instruction relates to goals in your personal life in kind of a physical way, but your physical life should correspond to your spiritual life. I said, but what about a spiritual goal? I said, what should be our number one spiritual goal? And he answered that for me. He said, your number one goal should be to want to be in the first resurrection. That should be your number one goal, and to be doing everything you need to do so that God will count you worthy for that. Now, of course, all that includes a lot of things. That includes backing up, supporting the work, praying for the work as it was being done when Mr. Armstrong was alive. And it's still being done, even though through Mr. Armstrong, the work that God did, it's still being done through the work that God did through Mr. Armstrong, even though Mr. Armstrong is dead, because of the way God has caused his recordings and publications to be preserved. And then, as God opened up the new medium, the new open door of the internet, the World Wide Web, and inspired and many people with God's Spirit said, hey, let's share this, and we can put it on YouTube, and we can put it on this web page and that web page, and make it available for people. And then internet search engines like Bing and Google and others, Yahoo and many others, a lot of them basing off of what Google has done, but a lot of them like that, making it easy for people to do a search and find all these various different websites where Mr. Armstrong's booklets, books, publications, recordings of his radio broadcast, telecast, even Bible studies and sermons, which you couldn't get those before unless you had been invited to church services to be a member of the body of Christ and be able to attend God's church. Now, people whom God might be calling can find sermons and Bible studies by Mr. Armstrong that were given in church services to church brethren, because people have put them on the web, and by others who were faithful, like Mr. Leroy Neff giving a feast sermon. Somebody recorded that with their little cassette tape recorder in the audience, and that tape's spun up available. And I was able to download that off the internet, clean it up a little bit, make a transcript for it this week, and finish. So this second part will do so much, and then we'll stop and do a third part, which is kind of good because Mr. Neff had the ability to really go heavy detail into a subject, and it's a little bit weighty, frankly, and especially with a bad recording, you really need the words to understand everything he's going to say, and it kind of helps to have both. For me, I'm both a visual and audio person. I need both. I need to see it and hear it. Some people do great with just audio, some people do great with just visual learning, and others who are like myself benefit when you've got both. And with modern day internet video capabilities, we can have both now, not just audio, but we can have video with it very easily. But Jesus Christ instructed us related to I didn't finish what Mr. Armstrong answered. He went on to say, after saying your number one spiritual goal, Stephen, for brethren, should be to stand before the Son of Man in the first resurrection. Your number two goal, he went on to say, should be to be accounted worthy to escape the great tribulation. And I appreciated him doing that, because later, and maybe even then, I had heard from some people, it's selfish to want that. Well, we're told to love others as much as we love ourselves, and we should love ourselves, and we should want to escape the Great Tribulation for a whole bunch of reasons. Not only because it's going to be the worst time of trouble, mega trouble, as Christ described it, as in the King James Version and others rendered mega trouble as great tribulation, which now is kind of a coined term that many people recognize as the fifth seal opening up. And that follows Let me pop this over here on this way, Stephen. Pop this over here on the first 6 of the 7 seals. That great tribulation follows the first 4 seals becoming so progressively active that they're considered to have blossomed or be blossoming toward a full bloom. And that compares to, I'll go back, I'll get to what Jesus Christ said about your escape here in a moment, but this all relates where Jesus Christ gave a comparison about these 4 seals blossoming to, as he said, when you see the limbs of a fig tree become tender and their little buds begin to blossom, he said, you know that summer is nigh. And he said, likewise, and he said not just the fig tree, but he said to all the trees, when you see them blossoming, know that summer's near. And he said, likewise, when you see these things, these 4 seals blossom and bloom, know that the kingdom of God is near. And how near? Well, as near as that 5th seal, 6th seal, and 7th seal. Once the 5th seal kicks in, we've got 3.5 years till we get to the 7th trump during the 7th seal, upon which Jesus Christ returns. So we know there's a 3.5-year countdown clock that starts when this great tribulation begins. 1260 years, a time and times and half a time, 3.5 times, times equal a year, 3.5 years, until Christ returns once this starts. And when is this going to start? It's going to start when these things blossom, just like Christ said. When the fig tree or any of the trees, when their little buds begin to blossom, you know that summer is nigh. When these things have blossomed and bloomed, and they've been progressive since Jesus Christ's time, but when they increase in frequency and intensity to the point that you can say, wow, this is, and the devastation behind them becomes full bloom, you can pretty much say, hey, watch out, the 5th seal can open any time, which is where we are, frankly. It can open any time, and that's a good reason why we should be praying. Let me back up, though, about not being selfish. If you are not accounted worthy to escape and you get left behind for this great tribulation, which is the time of the beast, who will be requiring people to work on the Sabbath and to bow down before the image of the beast, and if you refuse either one of those things, they'll put you to death. You will become a martyr. And that corresponds to what Jesus Christ instructed those who are left behind, who then are full bloom Laodiceans. Right now, if you're Laodicean, you're only half bloomed, because the Laodicean era, the era of martyrdom, is not here yet. And Christ said, when that era gets here, those of you who are left behind to form that era during the Great Tribulation, he says, you're only way into the kingdom now because you were accounted lukewarm. You were not accounted worthy to escape this Great Tribulation because, oh yeah, you're part of God's church. You're keeping the Sabbath, including the annual Sabbaths, the weekly and annual. Oh, and you go to the best feast sites, and you're well known in your community for working and but you just didn't do everything. You didn't follow Christ's instruction in Luke 21:36 to be watching and praying always, so I had to leave you behind. And the only way you're going to qualify now to be accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man, that's in the same verse. Luke 21:36 says, in order, the 2 prerequisites to be accounted worthy for what Mr. Armstrong said should be our 2 spiritual goals. They're both at the end of Luke 21, verse 36. If you watch these events daily and see them blossoming and pray always about them, oh yeah, you can mention once in a while, God, account me worthy. But he wasn't saying, pray always, all the time, account me worthy, account me worthy, account me worthy. Now that would be a selfish focus, because then you're missing the big picture of doing what you need to do to be accounted worthy, which includes both watching always and these events and watching your conduct too. In the previous verse, or a couple of verses before verse 36, Christ weaves into his explanation of these seals in plain language, he weaves in there at verse 34 instruction that we should be watching our conduct too, where he says, take care, brethren, that you're not overcharged with surfeiting, gluttony, both spiritually and physically, drunkenness, both spiritually and physically, and the cares of this world. And that could be considered both spiritually and physically as well too. So he weaves that in there, and we need to Luke 4:4 and Matthew 4:4 live by every word of God. Man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word of God. So yes, we've got to keep all of God's commandments, watch our conduct in that, and in details. We got to watch the details. Be careful we're not surfeiting or gluttony or drunkenness or overly concerned with the cares of this world. But primarily in Luke 21, as he's explaining these seals, all of them, in plain language, we pay attention to the ones that he's describing that relate to the four horsemen, the first four seals, because they're the only ones active now. And what he's saying to us, he's in between the first four seals and the fifth seal, he's saying, watch these that are active to the point where they become full bloom, so that, be watching, and he said, not just watching them, but as you watch them, you pray always. With the word that is rendered as always, you look it up in a good Greek-English lexicon, you see that it means, yes, pray all the time, but it goes further in detail to explain it means pray with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with your whole being. Put yourself into your prayers. Be concerned and care about the people who are affected by these first four seals as they're happening. People affected by false religion. People affected, the first seal, the white horse depicting, false religion. As Christ said, many will come in my name. They'll even declare that, yes, Jesus is the Christ. And yet they'll deceive many. And there'll be a few nuts out there who'll claim they are Jesus Christ, and they've already come. Yeah, that too. But primarily, Christ was saying, many will come in my name, in the name of Jesus, not claiming to be Jesus, although even the one that's the biggest in the world for deceiving the whole world claims their leader is the vicar of Christ, standing in the shoes of Christ as if he were Christ, although he doesn't claim to actually be Christ. He claims to be the vicar of Christ, standing in the shoes of Christ, which he's not, but he makes that claim. In the world, they pay homage to him as if he was, calling him Papa, calling him beyond Christ. He was the vicar of Christ, and yet they call him as if he were the Father, which Jesus Christ himself said, there's none good but one, the Father. Why call me Rabbi, Master? There's none good but one. That's the Father. Christ deferred, gave deference to the Father, saying the Father's greater than me. And so the one that stands in the shoes, is he allows people to call him Viva, Papa. They allow him to call him Father, Papa, Father. And to call him Reverend, and to call him His Holiness. We had that in a news story the other night. Now, I quoted the person saying holiness, and I thought later, well, Stephen, as I watched that, he said, you should have made a reference that we are not actually calling the Pope His Holiness. That was one of his adherents doing that. We were just quoting the adherent of the Catholic Church, calling the Pope His Holiness. We realize we're told, call no man reverend except the Father. And that name applies to him only. And to call no man father other than, a human father, that's different. But a spiritual father, call no man Papa, Father. And we recognize that there are some that can be as if they were a father on a human level, as one who teaches you in the family, one who brings you into the faith. But we don't put a human on the spear of the spiritual. And even once we are transformed, there's still only one Father in the spiritual family. That's God the Father. That is, Jesus Christ said, is greater than himself, Christ. All right, so I want to be clear on that. All right, excuse me, brother, but Christ instructed us to pray that we be accounted worthy to escape what's coming in this fifth seal, which comes after these first four blossom. It could be coming soon, and Mr. Armstrong gave good answer when I asked him, Mr. Armstrong, what should be our top spiritual goals? Number one, to be accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man in the first resurrection, and number two, to be accounted worthy to escape this great tribulation. And I was just saying, it's the time of the greatest trouble on earth since the beginning of the world, as Christ put it. There's no time greater than what's coming in this. You're going to hear Mr. Neff, if at some point, either here or in the last section of it we play, give the 6 verses from the Bible that describe the worst time of trouble ever. There's 6 places he points out in the detail he gives. And one of them is the one I'm referencing here in Matthew 24, where Christ says it in verse, 21, I think. He says, for then shall be great tribulation, mega trouble, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no nor ever after. Worst time of trouble ever. Since the beginning of the world, and nothing ever after it, again, is going to be as bad as what's coming in this great tribulation. It's going to be a time, as I was mentioning, when the beast will require those who are left behind to face this great tribulation to work on the Sabbath or be put to death. And that comports with the instruction Christ gives to the era of martyrdom. Once that era of martyrdom begins, it's called the Laodicean era, and it doesn't begin until martyrdom begins, and it's composed and comprised, made up of those who are part of God's church but who were not accounted worthy to escape because they didn't do everything Christ said do. They especially didn't do the instruction Christ gave us in Luke 21:36 to be watching these events daily, and not just watching them. We help you with that in World Watch through the week. So when you come home from work, we spent the day watching the news and pulling out those things that we can give you in an hour that relate to these seals we should be watching. But then you got to do your part. I can't do that part for you. You've got to get on your knees, as I have to do as well, which I am realizing as I encourage you to do what Christ said in Luke 21:36. It takes a great effort to make yourself get on your knees, spend some time praying about the people affected by these things, and doing it with some care and concern, where you don't just rattle it off. You pause and pray about it and put yourself into their shoes as if that were happening to you, and pray about them with that kind of concern. That takes an effort of time and of mental focus, and that's what God wants to see us doing. And if he sees us doing that daily, then they're writing our name in a book to be accounted worthy for the big flight on the 2 wings of a great eagle, mentioned in Revelation 12, verses 14 through 17, 18, 19. Even describing right there what happens once that eagle, that great eagle, flies you over into the Middle East, and you have to then, all of us collectively together as the woman picturing a church, and in this case the true church, and the portion of the true church that is accounted worthy to escape. It's not all the church that gets to go over there. Some of the church is not accounted worthy to escape, but they're still considered by God to be his church. It's considered to be a remnant of his church, the remnant that was not accounted worthy to escape. In Revelation 12, the rest of that after describing we're flying over there on a great eagle, those who are accounted worthy are flown over to the Middle East on a great eagle, and then to be chased by the devil through the mountains and through that rock area of Petra that leads into the only place on the face of the earth that is described in the Bible as being protected from the beast during the Great Tribulation. It's an area, I've got it now. Last night I was looking for it and we couldn't find it, but here it is. I've got it over here on this screen. I can pull it forward for you. Let's get the lower third out of the way for a moment here. In Daniel 11, verse 41, it describes the only area on the face of the earth that's out of the reach or out of the dominion, out of the power of the beast. It's protected by God during the Great Tribulation. It's mentioned as the land of the children of Ammon, Moab, and Edom, going from the top to the bottom. And down at the bottom where you see Edom, the southern entrance to Edom is Petra. Big rock walls, narrow passageway that reminded God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong of the children of Israel passing through the Red Sea. And Pharaoh's army chasing ancient Israel, and God letting part of that gelled up water, ice water, break enough to let water enough flow out to muddy up the bottom of the Red Sea, so that the chariots of Pharaoh's army, the wheels got stuck in the mud, and their horses couldn't run in that mud, and so ancient Israel was able to get on through the Red Sea before Pharaoh's army could get to them and be safe. And then God caused the whole thing to come crashing down. It melted the ice quickly and let the ice crush along with the water on the Pharaoh's army. Well, Mr. Armstrong saw the same scenario, since Revelation 12 describes Satan sending a flood, which in the Bible is symbolic, as you read in several places throughout the Old Testament. Floods, water, is the description God would use when Israel would be in battles with armies, where a flood, an army would be pursuing Israel. And so he says Satan will open up his mouth and spew out a flood against the woman, against God's true church, and the portion of God's true church that's accounted worthy to escape. Satan sends a flood, an army after them, as we're going into this protected area over here in the Middle East, described in Daniel 11:41. And just like God did with ancient Israel when Pharaoh's army was chasing them, he protects the woman and lets her get through that passageway in Petra. But he causes it to collapse into the ground as he says in Revelation 12, he opens up the earth and swallows the flood of Satan. He swallows the army Satan sends after the true church. And then Revelation 12 describes how that just really, the devil's already angry because he's gone up for a second battle to try to take over God's throne, something probably yet to happen. He's going to come back down very angry. Yeah, he's already angry, but he's really going to stir it up and go after the remnant, as Christ describes it. The Word describes it in Revelation 12. He goes after the remnant after he attacks those accounted worthy to escape, and his army is swallowed up in the earth when God opens up the earth there at Petra. So then he goes after the remnant, those who are left behind, not accounted worthy to escape, but they're still part of God's church. They're keeping the Sabbath, they're keeping the holy days. They just weren't following all the instruction. Maybe they were watching even. Maybe that's some of you, but you're not putting your heart into your prayers about these events. Let me come back to this. About these events. Well, let's come out to where you can see this side over here. They weren't putting their hearts into the events related to these four seals that are active now. We're seeing them. 90% or greater of the world news today relates to these four seals. And we hone in on the ones that we should most be praying about that relate to these. Well, I say 90%, maybe not quite that much, because you do have to pull it out. You do have to, but you need to put your heart into your prayer about it, the ones that relate to these, and let God see that in you, and not just see it, but you develop a relationship where you're with him on it, and where you care about the people, and you're praying sincerely and earnestly, God, thy kingdom come, and not just setting goals that elevate you in this life for the cares of this world, which will wind up getting you nowhere when it's cold if you're really going after things in this world too much. It's not. Sometimes you're going to be in situations where It's not going to make you well when you're sick. It's not going to keep you warm when you're cold. God will let you get in a situation where you might have a whole lot of money, but the electricity in the area goes off. Oh, well, then now you can't run your heaters. You need to stay close to God where He'll watch after you and make sure you are always, that you're okay. He'll let us go through trials, yes. But He goes after those who are left behind, who are not counted worthy to escape. And He tells us, then here's the proof that Mr. Armstrong was right, even though you've got local ministers trying to tell you, oh, well, Mr. Armstrong died, so he didn't know what he was talking about. He thought he was going to live till Christ returned. Well, yeah, initially, I'm sure the Father had it in mind to have Christ return while Mr. Armstrong was alive. But so many of us were not getting it, brethren. Wake up! Mr. Armstrong would have to shout at us. We didn't pull it. And God had to, in His mercy, and under the principle He gives us in 2 Peter 3, verse 8 and 9, where He says, as a day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as a day with God, and God doesn't esteem or account time the way man does. And so God is not slack concerning His promise, because for Him a day is as 1,000 years. And so He had to extend things 30, 40, 50 years longer than He wanted to. He wants Jesus Christ to return. Christ is already qualified by having conquered Satan in the supreme battle for world rulership. Christ is already qualified to replace Satan on the throne of this earth. And you can bet your boots the Father is very desirous to have Christ, with the time, 6,000 year time being, right here. He's very desirous, eager even, to have Christ return and take Satan off that throne, put him in the bottomless pit, and to usher in and restore God's way, His government upon the whole earth, which is what that thing up above me pictures, the statue from the second chapter of Daniel, from the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. That Nebuchadnezzar was pictured as that head of gold, and then as the first world ruler, and then after him a second, a third, and down to the fourth for today, the Roman Empire governing, having ruled the earth, and coming down to modern times where those 2 feet with 10 toes represent 10 concurrent kings that will give their power to a beast, a dictator, an emperor, who will revive the Holy Roman Empire for its 7th and final time, and it's going to do what it needs to do to rule the earth by, first of all, knocking out the 2 great world powers that beat the Roman government in round 2 and round 3 of World War. I'm sorry, I should have said round 1 and round 2, because round 3 is yet to come. And so that in round 3 it can dominate the world. First thing it's going to do is knock out the 2 great world powers, the allies from World War I and World War II that defeated Germany and kept it from ruling the world. Now, when Germany's in charge of the beast power, first thing it's going to do is knock out the United Kingdom and the United States with the missiles that destroyed, lay waste all of the cities of the UK first, and then later that same day or the next day, those of the United States. That's the way God's end-time Apostle Herbert Armstrong was inspired to put that to us. I'm simply repeating what he taught and instructed us. By inspiration, he was given that of God to understand, boom, the beast will knock out all the cities. That's the prophecy in Ezekiel that we'll get to in a moment, from chapter 6, verse 6. And I believe Mr. Neff will be maybe covering that in this section. Maybe it'll be in the later section, but it's something Mr. Armstrong would remind us of often, and we should be aware of. We should be sober, brethren, and realize that this great tribulation could be coming on us at any time. But when Christ does return, He returns as a rock that smashes that thing up above us there on the toes, like pictured. Let me come back in here so I can switch over to a slide where we can go and I can show you. Let's bring this one full forward here, where when Christ returns, he returns like a rock that smashes that image on its toes, on its feet and toes, and causes the whole thing to fall over. You know, you could smash your toe, you can't walk. So this thing falls over and crashes into smithereens, all kind of little pieces. And that pictures and represents Jesus Christ returning and restoring the kingdom of God to this earth, thankfully. But before that, now, you know, a very terrible time comes that Ezekiel is describing, the time of captivity. You know, after those missiles are sent. Let me back up a bit, though. There's one thing I want to mention about the remnant that's left behind during the Great Tribulation. Christ instructs in Revelation 3 and verse 18, I counsel those who are left behind now. I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire, the fiery trial of martyrdom, as God's end-time apostle Herbert has explained this to mean. I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire. Makes sense. The fiery trial of martyrdom. And the reason he's saying, well, you got to give your life in martyrdom to buy of me that gold of martyrdom, is because you were lukewarm. He describes in the 4 verses before verse 18, where he starts the instruction to the Laodiceans, the condition of them is, oh, you think you got it made. Yeah, you're keeping the Sabbath, you're keeping the weekly and annual Sabbaths, going to the whole feast sites. Yep. You earn good money, have a lot of second tithe, you go to the best ones. And in that sense, maybe you're doing better than a lot of Philadelphians who are spending time praying and studying, and maybe they don't go after jobs that require so much of them, so you make more money because they're putting their focus on prayer. And they take the jobs God opens up and says, hey, just do this, you know, and then keep your focus on me and what I'm doing and where we're going, and praying for people affected by it and all of that. But they think they got it made in the shade, and he says, nope, you're poor, blind, you don't realize you're poor, blind, wretched, and naked. And they get left behind. They're kind of shocked. Wow, my friend, he was taken, he's gone, he's over there, and I'm here. Well, you blew it, and then Christ is going to come knock on your door then. Now we have to seek him. And the information and things we need, it's out here for us if we're paying attention to what God taught us through his end-time apostle. We're told to remember, Revelation 3:3, we're told to remember by and through whom we learn these things. And we're told in Titus 1, the instruction for the ministry, and all of us, brethren, whether you're in the ministry or not, lay members, everybody, we're all called to become kings and priests. Yes, teachers with Christ, but kings and priests with Christ, sitting on Christ's throne as fellow king and fellow priest, you know, subservient and under him, but in that member of the God family and a king and a priest, a very blessed resurrection to receive kingship and priesthood. We're in training for that. We should be in training for that. That's the position we're going to be given in the first resurrection. Now, those who fall a little short, not accounted worthy to escape, they're also not accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man until they do what Christ says do in verse 18 of Revelation 18. He says, because you were lukewarm, you got to prove yourself hot. You got to go through something that caused Jesus Christ, his blood, to appear as if it were... let me rephrase that. It caused his sweat to appear as if it were blood the night before his crucifixion. And you can bet your boots when the beast says, okay, if you don't recant of this not working on the Sabbath and not bowing down before the image of the beast, we're going to kill you. We're going to put you to death. And maybe the night before you are to go on the guillotine or on be burned on a stake, your knees are knocking, you're sweating as if it were blood like Christ did, and he's already come and knocked on your door before that to tell you, look, if you'll endure to the end, even though the beast is going to require your life for enduring, keeping the Sabbath and not compromising it, not even an inch or half an inch or a millimeter, you don't even work 5 minutes on the Sabbath for the beast. You say, nope, I'm not compromising this. Well, it's going to be your life then. Well, Christ has told you to give your life. That's the way you buy of him gold tried in the fire. So the beast provides that opportunity. You don't have to kill yourself. They'll do that. Buy of God gold tried in the fire, give your life. Just refuse to work on the Sabbath. They'll do this part that Christ requires of you if you're left behind for you. And so that's why Mr. Armstrong was correct when he said the Laodicean era doesn't begin until into the Great Tribulation, after Philadelphia has been taken away to a place of protection and safety. Those ministers that are teaching you otherwise, the Laodicean era is already here, doing that as God has answered, as I've asked, why are these ministers saying that? And why are they setting up these groups? Well, it all relates. They're saying that the Laodicean era is already here because that kind of covers them for having set up a blankety-blank banana-peeling Church of God group now. And so many of them doing it, it confuses the world, should confuse brethren too. Wow. Hey, what happened to God's church? How come we're 600 different blankety-blank, different named Church of God groups? Isn't God's church, didn't Christ say, I will build my church? Isn't it one church, one body? As he says throughout several places in the New Testament, it's one body, one church. So why do we have so many denominations now of it? The blankety-blank this, the blankety-blank that, banana-peeling Church of God. The adjective being the banana peeling of the parts of speech. That's why I use the phrase banana peeling, because all these adjectives have been put in front of Church of God, the ABC Church of God, the XYZ Church of God, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to name any one particular one, but ministers have done that. They confuse everybody. They cause people to think, oh, we're okay. We got our Church of God over here. But the Church of God is scattered. There's no one has received, other than Mr. Tkach has received the baton, and he went apostate with it. He hasn't given it to any of the splinter groups, and splinter group A, splinter group B, C, D, E, F, G 600 times. So who's got the baton? Where is God's one church? It's scattered, brethren. It's scattered. It's scattered. God has left it that way for now. He'll regather us for sure at the time of the Great Tribulation, when those who are accounted worthy to escape are taken to that place. I put the picture up from the Bible showing the old lands of Ammon, Moab, and Edom that Daniel 11:41 describes as the only area on the face of the earth protected from the beast during this Great Tribulation. That's where we go. And that's why Mr. Armstrong, when he went over there and checked out that area mentioned in Daniel 11, he saw Petra with those big rock walls that said, wow, this is like the Red Sea being gelled up. The true church goes through this. Satan sends an army to chase us, just like Pharaoh sent his army in to chase ancient Israel. And God will open up the earth, let these rock walls come crashing down upon the army and the hole. Of course, the hole alone could swallow up the army, and that could do it right there. But if it's anything like what happened with ancient Israel and Pharaoh's army going through the Red Sea, it'll be just like going through Petra, and the rock walls falling in like the sea coming back together and crushing the army and falling in the hole with the army. And then Satan becoming full of wrath and going after the remnant, those who were not accounted worthy to escape, to whom God says, buy of me gold tried in the fire. That's the central verse. Verse 18 is right in the middle of 9 verses, the only verses that relate to the Laodicean era in the Bible that describe the Laodicean era. Right in the middle of those 9 verses, verse 18, there's 4 before it, 4 after it. The 4 after it are saying, endure. even though the beast is going to kill you, endure keeping my commands. You are a commandment keeper. You just weren't doing enough. You weren't following the instruction in Luke 21:36 to be watching daily and praying always, watching always, praying always. And not just praying that I count me worthy to escape. You can say that once in a while, yes, but you're really saying, well, if you say that, God, straighten out my life so that I'm doing what I need to do to be accounted worthy to escape, which that doing includes praying for the people affected by these 4 seals. Praying always for the poor people affected by these things. I'm starting to mention them. They're affected by false religion, that are affected by the 2nd seal depicted as a red horse, war and rumors of war. That's news is full of that. People suffering from warfare. And as a natural fallout, the 3rd seal and 4th seal from famine and from pestilence, including the 4th seal having a rider named Death, that includes death by seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, commotions on the ground, earthquakes, tsunamis, wildfires, volcanic eruptions, floods, any kind of seismic activity, commotions, and terrake, trouble, general trouble, not the mega trouble, but trouble that leads up to the mega trouble. The beginning of sorrows is part of the 4th seal also, mentioned only in Mark 13, verse 8. Terrake, trouble, roiling waters, mobs, seditions, the trouble that leads up to the mega trouble, that tells us the mega trouble is coming. And once it does come, there will be some accounted worthy to escape, a very worthy goal, and you got to do a lot of stuff to be accounted that way. And there will be some who are left behind, who Christ says, give your life, buy of me gold tried in the fire, be willing to continue to keep the Sabbath. This is going to prove yourself hot, without compromise now. Follow this instruction fully. Keep the Sabbath, even though the beast is going to kill you for it. But you've bought of me gold tried in the fire, and you'll be in that first resurrection along with those who were accounted worthy to escape. We've got to, even in that safety, you've got to keep up the right attitude and not get mad at somebody because they got a better rock hole, a better cave than you got. Now you're all bent out of shape, and now you hate this brother, and and God no longer accounts you worthy to stand before the Son of Man. So, the sealing of the 144,000 doesn't occur until after the 6th seal, before the 7th seal, until after the 6th seal occurs 2.5 years into the Great Tribulation. And then the sealing of the 144,000, then the last year of the Great Tribulation is the year, has combined with it the year-long Day of the Lord, the 7th seal opening up, and boom, hurting the earth in the first 4 seals known as the 4 winds, and then causing men to suffer in the last 3 trumpets, the 5th, 6th, 7th trumpet, as the 3 woes, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd woe, 5th trumpet being the first woe, 6th trumpet being the 2nd woe, where the 200 million man army comes into the picture, and the 7th woe, the 3rd woe being the 7th trump upon which Christ returns to pour out the 7 last plagues, the 3rd woe being the same as the 7 last plagues. So there's a little picture for you of what we're looking at ahead of us, and we're just before that 5th seal, the Great Tribulation, and some are going to be accounted worthy to escape, some are not. Hopefully, brethren, you're being encouraged by the fact and the things you're going to hear Mr. Neff talk about that relate to this Great Tribulation, the time of Ezekiel, and people being taken into captivity during that Great Tribulation and being required to work on the Sabbath. And the true people of God, part of His church, will refuse to work and will be killed. And they'll have earned their seat in the family of God in the first resurrection, the blessed resurrection, by having bought of God gold tried in the fire. Those accounted worthy don't have to do that. They just continue to be nourished and protected in place of safety during this Great Tribulation. All right, let's go ahead. So we're going to have just enough time to play this part of Mr. Neff. So I've given you like the sermonette or the split sermon as if it turned out to be here, brother. But I think I ask God to, when I open my mouth here in these live streams, to inspire me. And I think you can hear He's given me some inspiration, brethren. And I hope it encourages you to say, yes, this week I'm going to watch this news and do what I need to do and avoid all this stuff Mr. Neff's going to be talking about now in this part 1B of Ezekiel, with what's coming upon the sons of Joseph, upon the modern-day descendants of Ephraim in the United Kingdom, upon the modern-day descendants of Manasseh in the United States. Following the missiles that'll kill 1/3 of the people, following the disease the fallout from radiation, people dying by disease, the things that kill you nuclearly from radiation. That'll kill a second third of the people. The 1/3 that remain alive are taken into captivity. That Ezekiel's talking about this captivity, that the people of the United Kingdom, the United States, the modern-day descendants of the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim in the UK, Manasseh in the United States, get taken captive. That's what this thing is talking about, Ezekiel. So I wanted to build you up to it. And that's why it's important, because this is coming upon the people of the United Kingdom, the people of the United States. It's going to affect the rest of the world. It's going to affect the rest of the tribes wherever they are, including Reuben in France, who's got himself actively involved as part of the beast power, the pre-beast power. But that beast power, as he's done in the past, he's going to stab Israel in the back. He's going to stab Reuben, the son of Israel, Reuben, in the back like he's always done. Reuben's too dumb to look at history and see that. Oh, yeah, we're Europe. This modern, yay. He's in there with them again, not learning lessons from history. It'll affect the rest of the tribes of Israel too. But since Joseph got the birthright promise and the big blessings, and the blessing of the people of the two great powers of the earth, the United Kingdom and and Europe and the United States, and Ephraim in the United Kingdom, Manasseh in the United States, two great powers. They, the two sons of Joseph, they will especially suffer this captivity thing, because Europe's going to want to knock out those two great powers of the Allies that beat Germany out during rounds 1 and round 2 of World War. And they've learned their lesson. They're smart in war. They say, we got to get rid of those allies that'll if not defeat us in round 3, would at least hamper us greatly. And because the people of the United Kingdom and the United States are largely grossly sinning in the way that is described here as the reason why God allows his people to go into captivity, to learn a lesson, we're doing like ancient Israel did. And this was a prophecy for us today that's describing how we are doing the sin that was prophesied we'd do, as ancient Israel did, and they went into a milder form of captivity, but this is for us today. Let's go to Mr. Neff with this. I'm going to switch the lower third and show you Mr. Neff's name, speaking in 1981 on this part 1 of Ezekiel he did. We'll do the second section of part 1. We're calling it 1B here. So I got it queued up where we left off last night. So let me go ahead and bring that in full screen. So you have to do that on this button over here. We'll go ahead and just pull the lower third out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and start the scrolling, and then we'll catch up and we'll have the audio come in now. Oh, wait a second, brother. I got the wrong... No, this is right. This is where we left off last night. We'll pick up right here. Leroy Neff.
Now, let's get a little bit of the picture here. I mentioned that the house of Judah was in the process of going into captivity. And I say in the process because 8 years, 14 years, or whatever it was before, there was the first deportation, and there were various deportations down to about 585. over about a 19-year period. So that is the time mostly when Ezekiel prophesied. Now, he prophesied a little beyond that time, a few years beyond that time, but not a long time beyond that. But the house of Israel had gone into captivity about 741.
Brother, I'm going to pause Mr. Neff for a moment. I'm sorry. I hit the button and started this back over. As soon as we get to where he is. All right, let's see. Well, I'm sorry for goofing that up. Just bear with me a second. I'll get the scrolling text right back up with us. This is an outstanding sermon, one of the most outstanding sermons I've heard Mr. Neff give. Mr. Armstrong mentioned one of Mr. Neff's sermons as being the best he ever heard about peace. I'm trying to find that. And now this mentions house of Israel gone into captivity about 741. I'm sorry, that's a mistype in there, so that's why I'm not finding the place. Let me correct that. There we go. Okay, now let's pick him up. That's where he was when I got the scrolling text out of the way. Back to Mr. Neff.
Now, we sometimes say 718, and I don't know that it matters very much. That's only 3 years difference, and we're talking about events only almost 2,700 years ago. And I don't know if we need to quibble about whether 721 or 718. But if we use the year 721 as the time of Israel's captivity, and the beginning of this prophecy in 591, it was 130 years previous to the beginning of this book that Israel had gone into captivity, the house of Israel. Now you all know that the house of Jacob, or the children of Jacob, which became a nation in Egypt, went into the wilderness, went into the promised land, later, centuries later, were divided during the time of Rehoboam and Jeroboam and became two separate nations. They were two separate people. They had different national boundaries. They had different tribes. They had a different government, different laws, a different priesthood, almost a different everything, except they all descended from Jacob and from his family. When people, scholars and others, theologians, people who study the Bible, read the book of Ezekiel today, they think that the house of Jacob, or the house of Israel, or the house of Judah is all one and the same people. It's talking about the Jews, and of everything in the book of Ezekiel and other places, for that matter, whether it's talking about the house of Israel or the house of Judah, it's talking about the same people. Now, I presume that all of us realize differently. We've read Mr. Armstrong's booklet on the United States and British Commonwealth and Prophecy. If you haven't, you should read that particular booklet. But we have believed and taught since when? I forget Mr. Armstrong first started teaching this in when? 1929. Was it 1929? I think Mr. Whitty mentioned that the other day. It seems it was 1929 when Mr. Armstrong first came to understand the identity of the United States and Great Britain, and that the United States is Manasseh, has descended from Manasseh, the tribe of Manasseh, and Great Britain has descended from the tribe of Ephraim. In other words, the sons of Joseph, who was the son, of Jacob. Now, some years ago, I think it was about 1974, 1975, I had a sermon in Dallas, Texas, and I went through the book of Ezekiel, just skimming the high points, somewhat like I'll be doing this evening, and I emphasized several times this point about the fact that we have descended from ancient Israel, and that many of the prophecies in the book of Ezekiel relate to us and to the other Israelite nations as contrasted and as separate from the Jews or the house of Judah. Immediately after the sermon, the young man came up to me that I recognized, at least by face. I didn't remember his name, I don't think. But he had lived here at Big Sandy for a couple of years, and now he had moved to Dallas. And he was very upset with me. And he couldn't understand why we were getting back to all of this dogmatism. He says, well, now the church used to be very dogmatic, and we got away from that, and now you're getting back to this. He says, I've studied into this Israel thing. He says, I've read Mr. Armstrong's book. He says, I've read history. And he says, I've proved without any shadow of a doubt that those prophecies relating to Israel, the house of Israel, refer to the modern day state of Israel. Well, that just about floored me, just about appalled me. And I don't know how you can jam all of these prophecies, all of these things about the house of Israel and say that's talking about the Jews over in Palestine. It obviously could not fit there. And if you just read carefully through the book, you'll see that it is so much more than that. And they could not, under any stretch of the imagination, be what is referred to here as the house of Israel. Now, apparently, from the way this man thinks of this, and the way many others do, that God had forgotten, by the time of Ezekiel, that a century and a third before that time, the nation of Israel had gone into captivity. And God had forgotten that those nations had divided about 970 BC. God had forgotten by the time of Ezekiel that they had their two capitals. That God had forgotten by the time of Ezekiel that there were two national boundaries, that they were different tribes, and that they were sometimes, even according to Scriptures, fighting with each other. The Jews, the house of Judah, fighting against the house of Israel. So apparently he thought that God had forgotten all of that. So the first thing I want to read in the book of Ezekiel is chapter 37. I said we're just going to pass over it quickly, but I forgot about this. Hope you don't mind. But I'm not going to read the part now that I'm going to read tomorrow. Chapter 37, starting verse 15. And this is one of those sections that start out as I just read to you a little while ago. The word of the eternal came to me. This is not the beginning of the prophecy. The beginning of the prophecy starts back several chapters. Maybe you'd like to look back here to chapter 33, verse 21. In the 12th year of our exile, the 10th month and so on, that is the beginning of this specific prophecy. Then, chapter 34, verse 1, the word of the eternal came unto me. Chapter 35, verse 1, the word of the eternal came unto me. And now, chapter 36, verse 16, the word of the eternal came unto me. Then, on down to verse 15 of chapter 37. The word of the eternal came unto me. Son of man, take a stick and write on it. For Judah and the children of Israel associated with him. Now, what he is saying is that the Jews, the tribe of Judah, had associated with them, and people who were considered as Jews, some of the children of Israel from other tribes. And if we look through the Bible history, we'll see that specifically, part, maybe all, the tribe of Simeon might have been with them, a lot of the tribe of Levi, and also the tribe of Benjamin. More often we think of the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, but probably some of the others were mixed in there, and maybe just a scattering, a few of the other Israelites beside that. So he's saying now, for Judah and the children of Israel associated with him, then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph. Now Joseph was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and if you read back in the book of Genesis, you'll find that he received a double portion, one portion above his brethren, so that his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, became tribes in their own right. For Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, that's the younger brother rather, who became greater, and all the house of Israel associated with him. And so you see with Joseph, who was two of the 10 tribes rather, there were 8 other tribes, and they were all, you see, the house of Israel. And join them together into one stick. So he says, now you write the name of Jew or Judah on one stick, You write the name of Joseph or Israel on the other stick. And then you join them together into one stick. So now you just have one stick, and it has on one end the name of Judah, and on the other end the name of Joseph or Israel. And when your people say to you, "Would you not show us what you mean by these?" Say to them, "Thus says the eternal God, behold, I am about to take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel associated with him, and I will join with it the stick of Judah, and one will make them one stick." Now, I haven't time to read all of this, but let's pick it up in verse 21. Then say to them, "Thus says the eternal God, behold, I will take the people of Israel from the nations among which they have gone, and will gather them from all sides, and bring them to their own land," back to the land of Palestine, "to the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king over them all." Now, if you look over at Israel now, there's no one king. They don't have a king. They have a president, a prime minister, and a parliament. But there's not a king over them. And they shall no longer, or be no longer two nations, and no longer divided into two kingdoms. Now God inspired this. Verse 15 says, "The word of the Eternal says this." And all Ezekiel did was to write it down. Then he mentions that they're not going to continue in their sins, verse 23. And then in verse 24, notice this: "My servant David shall be king over them." That's who the king is that he mentions in verse 22. Now, David isn't alive today. He's been dead since, almost 1000 BC. It's almost 3,000 years ago that he died. He hasn't been alive since that time. When is it that God is going to raise up David? At the first resurrection, at the last trumpet, at the return of Jesus Christ, at the beginning of the millennium. That's when David is going to be king. And when that happens, God is once again going to put those two nations, which have been separated since about 970 BC. What's that? About 2,900 years ago. A little fast here. And finally they're going to be one nation again. Let's read that again, verse 24. "My servant David shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. And they're going to obey me," as he goes on to say. That David is going to be their prince forever. Verse 26, he says, "I'm going to make a covenant of peace with them." And we read another book, in the book of Daniel, how that Christ is going to confirm the covenant with Israel for 1 week. He's already done it for a half week. He's going to finish it during this time. Then he's going to set his sanctuary among them, which you'll find starting in chapter 40. And verse 28, "Then the nations will know that I, the Eternal, sanctify or set apart Israel, when my sanctuary is in the midst of them forever." Now, the reason why I have gone over this particular section, this particular time, is to point out that God remembered. Most people don't, but God remembered that they were two people, two geographic locations, two capitals, different tribes, different kings, different dynasties of kings, and so on. Now, God knew that, and knew that it was going to be that way right up until the very end. Now, a lot of people don't know that, but if you're going to understand anything about the book of Ezekiel, you have to understand that. And so I've mentioned it right at the beginning. So the house of Israel and the house of Judah were two separate kingdoms, and they are to this day. They're separate peoples. Actually, now, many nations, where at one time there were one nation, then two nations, and then the 10 tribes went their own way, and they've become additional countries and additional nations. So the house of Israel and the house of Judah are to become one nation again under a resurrected David at the beginning of the 1,000 years. But now this book was written during the time of Judah's fall, not Israel's fall. And yet strangely, and this is something that possibly you do not realize, that the house of Judah is addressed or mentioned only about 6 times in this book. Now, I looked this up in the Strong's Complete Concordance. Excuse me, not Strong's, Cruden's. It's my traveling concordance. And when I'm traveling, flying on airplanes, I don't like to take Strong with me. Or Young. I guess you can understand why. Because it's big and heavy. Well, now, Cruden's Complete Concordance, sadly, is not a complete concordance. I wish it were, but it isn't. But it's small. I have one here that's only less than a half-inch thick. Anyway, I looked through there, and I could only find 6 places where the house of Judah was addressed or mentioned. Then I found that there were almost 70 places where the house of Israel was mentioned, and one where the house of Jacob. And so I went through and I marked all 70 of those, and then as I read through the book, I found that there were still some more. So I don't know exactly how many there are. Maybe sometime I can get the other concordance and see exactly. But at least based on Cruden's concordance, there are 10 times more references to the house of Israel than to the house of Judah in this book. And yet you see Israel's gone into captivity 130 years earlier. I think from that it ought to be very obvious that the emphasis is overwhelmingly on the house of Israel rather than on the house of Judah. But the things that were happening to Judah were events that were referred to from time to time, and also then were used as types and as references to what's going to happen to Israel. All right, now I'd like to go to the beginning of the book, and of course I'm just going to have to cover the high points as I mentioned. I want to try to get the setting so that maybe tomorrow it will be a little more meaningful to you when we get into the first part of chapter 37 and the things that lead up to it. All right, we come to chapter 1. We have the date of that particular prophecy, which was, as I had already mentioned to you, about, 591, I think it was. 591 BC. At this particular time, Ezekiel and his former king, King Jehoiachin, had been in captivity in Babylon for 5 years. This is the 5th year now of the exile of King Jehoiachin and also Ezekiel and others. And through the most part of this first chapter, excluding this just a very brief introduction, we find described first the cherubim, or living creatures, and it describes them in great detail. And when you read and see the detail here, and you try to figure out what was Ezekiel saying there, sometimes it's a little bit hard to understand what he means. Now, if you were there, I'm sure that you would have a lot more trouble than Ezekiel to try to describe these fabulous creatures. And you would think, well, now it looks like this in one thing, one looks like an ox, something looks like a man, and something else looks like an eagle, and so on and so forth. He tries to describe things as best he can, and even after he does it, because we've never seen anything like that, it's pretty hard to understand. And the same way with the wheels that start out about verse 15. Now, let me say this. But even though you may have a little difficulty in understanding exactly what he's describing, and you can picture it perfectly in your mind, which of course you can, if you see one of these, if you see these living creatures, and you see these wheels, and you see the things described here, you'll say, well, now that's exactly what Ezekiel was talking about. You'll know that that's what he was talking about. So when you get to see one, then you'll know, well, here's the real thing. Now I know what he was talking about, and I can understand why he had such difficulty in putting it in English. Of course, he didn't put it in English, he put it in Hebrew. And I guess we'd be worse off in Hebrew. So he describes this, and what he's describing are these living creatures. And over above them, there is a firmament, or we might call it an expanse, which begins to be described in about verse 22. And then above that firmament, or that expanse, or sort of a platform-like thing, but apparently looks like the sky or the firmament or the expanse. Let's pick it up, verse 26. And above the firmament, over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne. Now we know what a throne is. Maybe we wouldn't know what this would look like, but it's some sort of a seat. And it describes that a little bit. And then seated above the likeness of a throne was the likeness of, it were, a human form. And then he describes that human form. You can compare this with the 10th chapter. You can also compare it with the first chapter of Revelation, which is describing Jesus Christ, the God of the Old Testament, the Yahweh of the Old Testament. Then notice here in the middle of verse 28. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the eternal, or of Yahweh. So what he is describing here is Jesus Christ, who is also the God of the Old Testament, known in the Old Testament times as Yahweh. That's what he sees here. He's seated on a throne over an expanse which is over these living creatures, these fabulous living creatures, cherubim. And this is what we might call a portable throne. Now, the Jews have a word for it in the Hebrew, which is not, I guess, in this particular context, but they call it the Merkaba. Merkaba, M-E-R-K-A-B-A. You might say it's the divine throne, or the throne of Jesus Christ. Now, the throne of the Father is described elsewhere, and there you'll find that the seraphim are related to that particular throne. Here, the cherubim are related to that. And so we see this fabulous throne over these creatures, such as we do not see on the earth, that can move instantly from place to place, from direction to direction, without even having to turn. And now this is speaking of Christ, the Yahweh, he said certain things here. He says that I'm sending you to the people of Israel. Now the people of Israel, that's in verse 3, include all 12 tribes. So he wasn't sent alone to the house of Israel, which was 10 tribes, or to the house of Judah, 2 tribes, but to all of them. He calls them a nation of rebels. By the way, I'm reading the Revised Standard Version. Verse 4, he calls them impudent and stubborn, and continues to mention them as being rebellious. Then starting about in verse 8, he is told now to take a scroll of which dire events are mentioned, and he says to eat them, and he goes on to show that it's going to be sweet as honey, but it's going to taste bitter. Apparently, you'll find a similar thing happening to the Apostle John in Revelation 10, verse 9 to 11, but apparently he's just saying, now you ingest or take in these words that I'm going to give you, you go to tell them to the people of Israel, and they're bitter words, you might say. They may seem good to start with, but they're going to be very bad. Then, in verse 1, notice of chapter 3, he says, go speak to the house of Israel. Now here was Ezekiel in captivity. He couldn't come and go as he wanted, at least apparently he could, because he was in captivity, in slavery. And there's no record in this book that he ever went to the house of Israel. Now the house of Israel, as I said, had gone into captivity 130 years before this time. They had been taken up north of here by some little distance by the Assyrians, up near the Caspian Sea. Maybe some of them were still there, maybe some of them were gone. I don't know. The histories of the events are rather sparse, so we don't necessarily know the specifics of that. But probably some of them were still to the north, maybe some of them were gone. But Ezekiel couldn't go there. It was many, many, many days' journey to go there. And there's no record that he ever went to them. Now, some of the elders of Israel came to the house of Israel, came to him on occasion, and he spoke to the elders on some occasions, and also to the elders of the house of Judah. Then in verse 4, again, he mentions, go to the house of Israel. Verse 5, to the house of Israel. Verse 7, to the house of Israel. And twice in verse 7, he mentions here to the house of Israel. Now, did God know who the house of Israel was? Of course he did. And Ezekiel knew who the house of Israel was. There's just a lot of people today who don't know who the house of Israel was. Now, verse 10, moreover, he said to me, Son of man, all my words that I shall speak to you, receive in your heart and hear with your ears, and go get you to the exiles, to your people, and say to them, so on and so forth. As I said, we have no record that he ever was able to do that. That's the prophecy for today. So that same message that God gave Ezekiel could be written in the Bible and then could be preached in modern times to the descendants. Because really a lot of those things that were happening back then were dual as far as the prophecy is concerned, and the important message is for our time, more importantly than it was at that time. And after he'd seen this vision, at the end of verse 15, he says, I sat there overwhelmed among them 7 days. After seeing this fabulous vision, he just sat, I guess, overwhelmed. Probably couldn't even talk for about 7 days. And at the end of 7 days, the word of the Eternal came to me. And then he says, I've made you a watchman. Now this is repeated several times in the book, 3 that I think of. Then, starting in verse 22, we find that he again sees this vision of the Eternal. It mentions in verse 23, in the middle of the verse, Lo, the glory of the Eternal stood there like the glory which I'd seen by the river Chebar. This is now out in the plain rather than by the river, or I guess we would call it the canal, the irrigation canal, Chebar. I suppose we can speculate a little bit about how difficult that must have been. If you lay on your side, for a few minutes or an hour or two at night time, you might become rather tired of laying on that one side. Imagine laying on one side without interruption for 390 days. That's well over a year's time. Now, he mentions this seed that he is portraying, and at the end of verse 3 says, This is a sign for the house of Israel. He mentions it again in verse 4 and in verse 5. The house of Israel, a 390-day period. And what he's portraying here is a siege to come on Israel. Now, Israel was in captivity. There is no historical record that from that day till now there has ever been a siege of Israel. Even if you think they're the Jews, or no matter, I guess, about who you might think they are, that there's been a 390-day siege. This is a prophecy for our time. Then he mentions the house of Judah in verse 6. And he's to lay on the other side for 40 days. And showing that the house of Judah, the Jews, are going to be deceived for 40 days. Now, as he goes on in chapter 5 to describe this in further detail, he mentions the various thirds. He mentions in verse 2 are going to be burned in the fire of the city. The third are going to be killed by warfare or by the sword. And the third part are going to be scattered to the wind, going into captivity, and then just a few of those are going to survive. And from Isaiah 6:13 and Amos 5:13, we see that apparently only 10% of the original pictures are going to survive the events that are here pictured. Let's pick it up just a little bit in verse 4. Now these again, you shall take some and cast them into the fire and burn them in the fire. From there a fire will come forth into all the house of Israel. You see, all the house of Israel, all 10 tribes. And so what was happening here, in symbolism you might say, which was the siege of Jerusalem, was going to represent what was going to happen to the house of Israel. Verse 5, thus says the eternal God, this is Jerusalem. I have kept her in the center of the nations and so on. It seems to me what he's saying is that Jerusalem represents, because it anciently was the capital of both Israel and Judah, does represent the house of Israel and the house of Judah, at least in certain senses. Now, let's come on a little bit further. And come to verse 9, chapter 5. And because of all your abominations, I will do with you, now I want you to notice this very, very carefully, because it's important. And I will do with you what I have never yet done. Now this is almost 590 BC, is what I'm talking to you about I have never done in the past. And the like of which I will never do again. What is he talking about? He's talking about a time of trouble that's going to come on Israel and Judah, such as never was in the past, never will be in the future. Now, there's only one time in history that could happen. It hasn't happened yet. You'll read about that in several other scriptures. If you want to write them down quickly, Jeremiah 30, verse 7 is one. Jeremiah 30, verse 7. Daniel 12, verse 1 is another. Joel 2, verse 2 is another. Mark 13, 19. Mark 13, 19. And Matthew 24, 21. Now, the one Matthew 24, 21 might be a little more familiar to you.
Brethren, I'm going to stop it for just a moment, leave this on the screen for just a few seconds. For those of you that are watching live, of course, if you're watching this from the archive, you could stop the archive recording yourself and pause it. But for those of you that are live, if you want to get these down, I'm going to give you just a few more seconds for these 6 verses that Mr. Neff has summarized here. Jeremiah 30, verse 7, that's one of the 6. Daniel 12, verse 1, the second. Joel 2, verse 2, the third. Mark 13, verse 19, the fourth. Matthew 24, 21, that we were reading in the introduction, that's the 5th. And actually the first one he mentioned was the one he was in Ezekiel 5, verse 9, which I might have it below this, but Ezekiel 5, verse 9 is where he was. Okay, let's go back to Mr. Neff now.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 places that specifically refer to this time of trouble, such as never was before and never indeed shall be. You see, this didn't happen 600 years BC. It hasn't happened yet, but it will happen very shortly in the future. So we can see that the prophecies here weren't relating back to that time. The things that happened then were just sort of a type or a forerunner in a dual sense of what's going to happen in the end time. Then in verse 12 he mentions about the 3/3 again. And let's come to chapter 6. The word of the eternal kingdom is, Son of Man, set your face toward the mountains of Israel. Now here again is the beginning, or a subdivision, we might say, of this first major prophecy. Now he describes the physical land of Israel. Now the cities are going to become waste. And yet when you go back and read the descriptions, that the things that happened in that time. And as far as I can find out, the cities were never destroyed. They were partially destroyed, but they were not totally destroyed. And so this is talking about a later time, which I just have time to read in any detail. The house of Israel is mentioned again in verse 11. And in chapter 7, the word of the eternal came to me. So another subdivision of this particular section. And in the land of Israel, he says, verse 5, disaster after disaster. Notice verse 14, they have blown the trumpet, which of course is the alarm of war, and made all ready, but none goes to battle. And this, of course, is telling about the time that was leading up to the time of great trouble, verse 9 of chapter 5. But when the Israelite nation, the house of Israel, is told the war has come, and they blow the trumpet and say to go to war, nobody's going to go to war. You can look around today and you can see several possibilities of why that might happen. And I won't take time to comment about those now. You can also see in this chapter possible intimation of atomic warfare causing lawlessness. Then in verse 23 he talks about the land out full of bloody crying. And also the city is full of violence. In verse 26, it mentions disaster upon disaster, rumor follows rumor. I guess a lot of the rumor mongers that have been very busy rumoring about God's people, they're going to be rumoring about other events some of these days. The law perishes from the priest and counsel from the elders. And there's more about that later, but the priests who should preach the law have gone from that, and they're not preaching the law today. They detest the law. They speak against the law today. All right, now that's the end of this first prophet, the first 7 chapters. So let me just very quickly summarize. We saw one section about the throne of God, then about the house of Israel, how that they are rebellious and stubborn. Ezekiel was set to be a watchman, which is surely a type of one in the end time. He mentions about the siege of 390 and 40 days, and that Jerusalem was a type of Judah and Israel. Then the 3/3 punishment, pestilence, war, and captivity, and how that God is going to ultimately bring destruction because of their idolatry and their sins. Now, if we go through these, if we have time, and I don't know if I'll have time to get to all of these various sections, but you'll find that in many of these, especially in relation to Israel, that the same sort of thing is repeated over and over and over again. You might say the nation has sinned, therefore punishment comes, which includes captivity. Then the people repent, and they are restored. And this is repeated, that theme is sort of repeated, not in its entirety, but sometimes in its entirety, through all of these various prophets. Now we come to the second prophecy. This was given now in 590, approximately, BC, the 6th year, the 6th month, and so on. The other was the 5th year. Now, he says that I sat in my house. I have to break into the thought here some places and not read the whole sentence or the whole verse. He says, I sat in my house with the elders of Judah. Now, he's talking about the elders of Judah, not the house of Judah, but elders from the house of Judah. And he describes various abominations that he sees, apparently in vision, in Jerusalem. But in verse 6, he says unto me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The great abominations of the house of Israel are committed. Now he's talking to the elders of Judah. He sees things that apparently were taking place in Jerusalem, which was a part of Judah not yet taken captive. And he says that the house of Israel are committing these sins. So apparently then, and also I think that this is dual, speaking of our time, that the same sins were committed by Israel as were committed by Judah. He mentions the various idols of the house of Israel, skipping on a few verses. Then in verse 12, then he said to the Son of Man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel are doing? So now the house of Israel, the elders of the house of Israel are doing similar things. And he talks about every man in his room with pictures. I don't know what kind of pictures are described here or that he's talking about. When you look around the land today, you see that some people have their rooms of pictures, pornographic pictures. They're watching their television sets or so on and so forth, and straying far from God and putting their hearts and their thoughts on the wrong things. I don't mean the television is wrong, but maybe the wrong use of it is. He says, they say, for they say the eternal does not see us, the eternal has forsaken the land. That's sort of the attitude that a lot of people have today too, isn't it? Because we have all of these same sins, the same problems. People think that God's in his heaven and all is right in the world. You know, God's in his heaven, as long as he keeps his nose out of our business, everything will be all right. Because God knows what's going on, and God will intervene at the proper time. All right, let's come on a little bit further. In verse 17, we notice the house of Judah is mentioned. He talks about violence, and as a result of that, then God is not going to spare, but he is going to punish. And then he describes some of that punishment, I think here in an allegory or a symbol, with executioners coming into the city of Jerusalem. And let's notice here in verse 4, the Eternal said to this man with the writing tape and the inkhorn, go through the city through Jerusalem, which basically was the capital of both Israel and Judah, and I think in a sense typifies both houses, and put a mark upon the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it. So he says, go through the city, or you might say go through Israel and Judah, and mark all of those that are sighing and groaning over the abominations. Now, most people are not concerned about the abominations.
Okay, brethren, let me come on out, because that's where I planned for us to stop this morning. Or that's as far as I got the transcript, and then there's about a half hour to go, and we'll do that next time we are covering this with Leroy Neff. It'll give me time next week to finish that up. And now I do notice there were a couple of places in my transcript where I had an error or two. Hey, and I noticed we've lost our audio. Ay. On Facebook Live, we lost the audio. I'm not sure how long ago. But I better go ahead and just sign us off and straighten that out. And have a happy rest of the Sabbath. Thanks for joining me today.